So we've seen before the example that I'm showing currently about upcasting in F#. So we've seen in the past the example that I'm showing on the screen right now, which is about upcasting objects in F#. In this particular example, the HTTP client and HTTP listener can both be used in the dispose call here, even though the dispose function expects an iDisposable as input. And these types, as you can see, are not iDisposables directly, but they do implement the interface. So there is an automatic upcasting being done in this step. In the last video that we displayed, we saw that this kind of automatic upcasting does not apply in all scenarios. I gave one example of that with an if statement, but there were also other examples where it doesn't apply. So please check out the last video if you haven't seen it already. What I want to show now is one final example that, well, where we can't do automatic upcasting, but where we can use something called flexible types, which is what this video is about. So I'm going to use the example that we have here, but slightly modify it so that we can create a sequence of these objects and then send them to a function that disposes multiple ones at the same time. And then we'll see the use case of something like a flexible type. So let me define another function here. I'm going to say dispose many. And we need two of these, so I'm going to create a first one. This one would have clients as input, so we would have multiple clients now. And the type of this that we're going to begin with is going to be a sequence of iDisposable. So I want to take the same functionality that I had in the previous example up here, extend it to this one, but implement the equivalent thing for a sequence of these. And naively, we might think that this sort of implementation that I'm going to go for now would work. So I would say that for C in clients, do c.dispose, right? So we're doing the same thing as we did up here. It's just that we take a sequence now of iDisposables instead of one single iDisposable. Now let me create a sequence. Here I would just do a duplication of object 1. So like that. That should give me a sequence. Sorry, I need to also write sequence like that. Okay, so we have a sequence here and everything looks fine. Let's try to call dispose many 1 on this sequence. So like that. You can see that we get a warning here or an error, and it says the type iDisposable does not match the type HTTP client. So interestingly enough, we could call this dispose method on a single client of iDisposable and it would do the automatic upcasting for us. But now that we're expecting a sequence of iDisposable, but we're really giving it a sequence of HTTP client in this case, because object 1 has type HTTP client. So this type also has sequence of HTTP client. It doesn't recognize that it can upcast each element here at the same time. And for instances like this, I mean, we could cast all of these directly, but there is a neat way to sort of implement things of this nature in F#, and that's with flexible types. So I'm going to create an alternate implementation here to begin with, and then I'm going to explain it. So let me just actually copy everything over. Let's do this and create this thing here. But rather than just writing iDisposable here, I'm going to put a hash symbol beforehand, like this. Okay, I need to change this to dispose many 2 here, and we have the same error as before because we're trying to call the first function, but if I update this now to function number 2, you can see that everything works fine. So what is this hash function? What does it actually do? What it does is similar to generics in F#, it allows you to provide a number of types instead of just one type. So here we say not just that the sequence needs to be iDisposable, but it needs to be something that can be casted to iDisposable, formally speaking, is what this thing means. So it gives us some flexibility in terms of the types that we can feed. It means that we can feed it any subtype of iDisposable and it's still going to work fine. So that's the flexible type. And there is actually an equivalent way in which we could implement this thing. So we would have the same functionality and it would work in the same way, but we would write it using the syntax that we're already familiar with. And what I would need to change it to then is, as opposed to just putting this hash symbol here, what I could do is I could create a generic type. So let's say I do a generic type T, and then I send that to iDisposable like this, specifically with an upcast. You can see that this does not create any compilation errors either. So This is really the same thing as what I wrote before. The flexible type is just a syntactic sugar, if you will, on top of this kind of thing. So as opposed to having to write any generic type that can be casted to an idisposable, which is going to become quite clunky if you have a lot of these things, you can just do hash idisposable, and that works in the same way. So those are flexible types in F#. They're not used that often, but in some circumstances where you need these kind of upcasting behaviors, they can be save you from having to implement sort of weird casting types in your declarations.